Hello and welcome everyone to the first Apert syndrome community webinar. My name is Rob Platika and I'm the online community manager at the European Organization for Rare Diseases, EURORDIS. We have just created a new community on RareConnect.org for Apert syndrome this September, and this webinar is an introduction to that community. And this webinar is the first in a series that we would like to do, and we'll tell you more about that. It's also a chance to ask some questions about Apert syndrome to our specialist, Dr. D. Gaines, PhD in neuropsychology. We also have Kaddy Thomas of Elijah's Hope and Tania Weissberg of Pause for Kids, who will be joining us in a few minutes. They'll be helping us understand the Apert syndrome community and explaining this webinar series more. So first of all, I'd like to start by describing RareConnect and the Apert syndrome community there on RareConnect.org. So this is the portal homepage where you can reach the Apert syndrome community or 65 other communities for rare diseases built in partnership with patient groups. Overall, across all of the communities on RareConnect.org, each is in 5 languages: English, French, German, Italian, and Spanish, with human translation of all stories and updates by patient groups automatically, and translations of forum posts on demand, which we'll get into in a second. There's about 80,000 monthly unique visitors across all the communities from 170 countries. And you'll see there that 2,500 members on average visit each month and spend about 12 minutes each visit. In 2013, RareConnect.org had over 6,000 user-generated content items like forum posts, stories, comments, and we expect in 2014 that number will be even higher. Here are just some of the other diseases that we have communities for, in addition to Apert syndrome on RareConnect. Here's the Apert syndrome community. As you'll see, it's split up into 3 sections, 3 main sections. Understand, which is stories, collections of links and articles on living with the disease. Meet, which is the forum where people ask questions. And Learn, which is a collection of scientific information and information from the patient groups involved in this project. And you'll see the URL there on the bottom of the screen. The Apert syndrome community was launched in September of 2014. Has 33 registered members so far, and we encourage you to go and join and sign up today. It's very easy, we'll show you. There's been 10 new stories added. There's 7 documents available in that Learn section. And if you have an idea for another webinar topic to cover, please email me there. This is how you join the community. It takes about 30 seconds, and you can pick a username that has your real name in it or does not. We allow you to be anonymous if you choose, as long as you follow the terms and conditions of RareConnect. The human translation of forum posts that I mentioned works like this. If you see a message in a language that you don't know, you click on the link. Of course, you have to be registered and signed in. You click on the link to request the human translation, this message only. Then this box appears for you to confirm that translation request, and it will be sent to your email, and it will also go back on the forum for the next person to read the translation, and that goes to a human translation service. So here you see that this post was originally written in French, and we're looking at the English translation. And then you see somebody answers in English, so they're able to exchange their experience there across the language barrier. So we're really focused on quality conversations and quality information being shared in that forum with the help of our moderators like Kaddy and Tania, who are on the webinar today. So to join the next webinar, it's very easy. If you're a registered member of the community, you'll receive an email announcement, or you can check the Apert syndrome community on RareConnect for announcements about the next topic, date, and time. You join us at that given date and time. Hopefully it's something convenient in your area. at the link below. It's always the same webinar room. You enter as a guest, no password. You connect your audio at the top of the screen, so your speaker icon turns green, and you're ready to listen and type your questions and be part of the conversation on the next webinar. So thanks very much, and now I'm going to introduce the main speakers of the webinar here. Tonight, again, our guests are Dr. Dee Gaines, PhD in neuropsychology, and the host of the Dr. D Show. Kaddy Thomas, founder of Elijah's Hope and mother to a son with Apert syndrome. And Tania Weissberg, an avid parent advocate, board member of pulseforkids.org, and also mother to a son with Apert syndrome. So now let's throw it over to Tania. Thanks for listening to that introduction.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here. I wanted you, Dee, to introduce yourself and explain a little bit about the field of neuropsychology, and Kaddy, when she's done, if she would do the same so people know who you are, and the topics that we're going to be discussing tonight are neuropsychology and the tools that we can use in our daily lives. So, Dee?
Glad to be here today. Thank you, Tania. My background is a doctorate in clinical psychology and neuropsychology. The work that I've done was assessing children with disabilities, but also patients with dementia, and I am known for traumatic brain injury research. Specifically, what neuropsychology does is serves as multiple tools. The first thing that neuropsychology does is assess the functioning of the person on a cognitive, behavioral, and emotional level, and compared to the group of age, education, and other factors, and looking to see where the person is at on those factors, both on an educational level, but also on a functional level. And specifically, the assessment of neuropsychology is warranted in cases where we believe there is a brain dysfunction, such as Apert syndrome. What neuropsychology also does is it allows you to find the prognosis or arrive to a prognosis where we believe there are venues that we can explore in cognitive rehabilitation. So the goal of the assessment is not just to find out where the child is in terms of functioning, but where do we think the child is going to be in the future, and then reassess that as time goes along. So with specific brain dysfunctions, we would recommend to assess the child perhaps every 2 years, and then later every 3 or 4 years, and in addition to that, recommend what we believe could be cognitive exercises, physical stimulation, sensory stimulation, etc., to allow the child to thrive. And that should be on a case-by-case, specifically with more difficult situations like Apert, where every child looks very different, and every brain, as relates to the disorder, while there are similarities, there's also a lot of differences. And it's very important to understand that a lot of the recommendations should really be specifically to where that child or that person specifically at in their progress.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Kaddy, now a little bit about you. You have an extraordinary story. You're an amazing person, and I'm so excited that we're finally getting to know you, because we did not have you on our social media networks, but now we do. So why don't you start from your beginning and tell us a little bit about you and how you made it so successfully through life.
Hi, my name's Kaddy Thomas. How long have you got in terms of my life story? Just very briefly, I am a woman, and I have Apert. I have an 8-year-old son who also has Apert. I feel quite liberated at the moment because suddenly my life, in terms of Apert, has opened up. I haven't had the opportunity to talk to somebody with the condition for probably about 15 years. So it suddenly becomes really quite liberating and exciting when suddenly I have a community opened up to me, people who actually understand the condition because they have it or they know somebody that has it. I am a very passionate person who wants to support other families really with a disability, particularly Apert. I set up Elijah's Hope last August, or registered as a company last August, because I was going through a particular horrendous situation, let's just say, and from that really things have really evolved. And yeah, I'm excited really about the
And here you are.
online. Yeah, I'm really excited about the Apert online community. I'm really excited about what we can achieve through the community. And yeah, that's me.
And so your goal with Elijah's Hope is to help families in your area who do not have access to the information that it would take to coordinate services for their child with a disability. And you're actually, because you've been through the system, you are offering a network of information and support, correct?
Yeah. Often, you know, as you will know, Tania, when you have a child with a disability, one of the frustrating things that we find is that you have to fight for services, basically, and it seems ironic that we should have to fight and work hard, you know, but we do. And I think one of the biggest areas of, well, there are many areas of frustration within the family unit, but I think one of them is the lack of information. So, like when I had Elijah 8 years ago, for example, you know, it was assumed that just because I had the condition, I didn't need someone to talk to about the fact that I had a child with Apert, for example. You know, and within a couple of days, I was going, hello, I know that I have the condition, but I still need support because I have a child. Suddenly I'm a parent. Suddenly I have a child with the same condition.
Yeah.
So I need support in that regard in terms of what to expect and who I need to see or who he's going to need to see, etc., etc. So yeah, Elijah's Hope's it's a practical resource because it's not just about information sharing.